You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. A strange, inexplicable state. To feel every cell of his body, to sense smells and sounds, but to be unable to move, to not understand what it all meant. Absolute, frightening emptiness reigned in his head, as if the world he had lived in had suddenly been erased, taking all the past with it. He couldn't remember anything, not his own name, nor the circumstances of what had happened, nor even the place where he was. The only thing he was sure of was that he was lying down. Everything else, thoughts and feelings, was hidden behind a dense, impenetrable fog. Finally, gathering his strength as if for a dangerous leap, he tried to open his eyes. His eyelids trembled, and faint glimmers of light penetrated the pitch darkness, shimmering with colored points. They widened, merged, turning into two trembling slits through which bright daylight poured. The next moment, unbearable pain pierced his head. He squeezed his eyes shut in fright, silently praying for the return of the blessed darkness he had so carelessly left. The pain thrashed about, having neither rhythm nor measure. It was absolute and omnipresent, the strongest he had ever experienced. Moaning hoarsely and pitifully, he felt a damp strand of hair slide upwards, and then something cool and soft rested on his forehead. This touch brought instant relief. The agonizing pain began to recede. The hammers and needles in his head lost their sharpness, diminished, disappeared. His nostrils, convulsively flared, caught a subtle, barely discernible aroma. It mingled notes of freshness, tartness, something sparkling, simultaneously familiar and completely new. Then a life-giving liquid touched his lips, flowed down his dry, aching throat, bringing a blissful sensation. A quick, light prick in the shoulder, like a mosquito bite, made him groan gratefully. And then he heard a voice, thin, like a silver bell, quiet as rustling grass, gentle as a kitten's purr. There, that's good. Very good. Just wonderful that you've woken up. And now you need to rest. Sleep. The wonderful sounds of the voice drifted away, fading. A last childlike thought flashed through his mind. Has Mum come back? This effort was met with a final volley of pain, and he instantly fell into a saving silence and darkness. Tap, 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 tap. A quiet but persistent rhythmic sound broke through his sleep. He took a long time gathering his strength, remembering the terrible outcome of his previous attempt to open his eyes. Finally, tensing in anticipation of pain, he opened one eye slightly. Feeling nothing suspicious, he fully opened his eyelids. Astonishment prevented him from squeezing them shut. Staring right at him, unblinking, was a gnome with huge blue eyes. A real gnome. Short, with a long grey beard and thick eyebrows, wearing a huge red cap. The amazing creature was lightly tapping the floor with a stick, and noticing his bulging eyes, it tilted its head, tugged at its beard, and giggled. He closed his eyes, hoping the vision would dissipate. But it only got worse. Now he saw two gnomes. This one, slightly taller, in a bright blue cap, had clearly joined the first. It's clear, I've gone mad, he thought, watching as the phantoms didn't disappear, but began to circle around him. Attracted by a strange tune, a third gnome appeared, this one in a bright yellow cap. Yes, I'm insane, he calmly concluded, watching the dance of multicolored caps with pleasure. At least I'm going mad cheerfully, with songs and dances. He listened to the tune, something very familiar, long forgotten. Oh my God, it's "A fir tree was born in the forest." He managed a difficult smile and moved his lips, repeating the words of the children's song. All right, everyone shoo out of here, quick! A familiar silver voice rang out. It now had angry, ringing notes, clearly directed at the mischievous gnomes. A chorus of stubborn snorting replied. You are not to enter this room. The voice came from somewhere to the side, and he couldn't see the speaker, still afraid to turn his head. But this is our room. Our things are here, and I need to get under my bed. A clamour arose. We'll sort it out later. And now, hold on to each other and form a train out that door. Quickly, came the reply. The gnomes obediently grabbed each other's clothes, and the first, taking charge, pulled the multicolored train away. Watching them go, he closed his eyes tiredly. Looks like I need to learn to distinguish reality from visions, and at the same time, accept that fairy tale creatures calmly hop around singing children's songs. How are you doing? A voice asked above him, and he again felt the subtle, slightly tart scent of freshness. Oh yes, you're doing very well. You can look right here at the tip of my finger. Okay, good. Now I'll move it. Don't take your eyes off my finger. Good. There, more. Look at the finger. Why can't you? He really couldn't, but not because his eyes wouldn't obey. He simply didn't want to take them off the face leaning over him. A fairy? A mermaid? Who was this? What amazing creature stood so close that he could see the thin, bluish vein on her temple? A vein. So it was a person? No, it couldn't be. There were no such creatures among people. People were coarser, denser, heavier, louder. They were covered in skin with hairs. They had bright, fleeting faces, and they constantly showed their teeth in unnecessary smiles. But she had just driven out a whole crowd of gnomes. Why shouldn't she herself be a dryad or a sylph? He had already come to terms with being in some strange, frozen world. Her face, as if outlined by exquisitely drawn calligraphic strokes. High, sharp cheekbones, almost straight eyebrows sweeping towards her temples, a small nose, delicately shaped lips, pale, matte, transparent skin. Everything about this face was inexpressibly subtle, graceful, light. It seemed woven from mist, from haze, and if you blew harder, the face would melt, disappear, like fantastic shapes in the clouds. She was not a beauty whose image imprinted itself on one's mind forever. And yet it was impossible to forget her, like a sunset or a cherry tree in bloom, and impossible to keep her close, like the scent of a flower or a fading evening ray. But there was something in this face that firmly held him to the ground, preventing him from carelessly vanishing. Her eyes. Huge, grey-blue. However, he wouldn't vouch for their colour. It was possible that this amazing creature could change their colour at will. And so it was. Just now they were grey with a bluish tint, but after a few moments they darkened, becoming the colour of dark pearl. Probably because their owner frowned in bewilderment. But apparently, the worry was unfounded. Her brow smoothed, her lips twitched in a slight smile, and now her eyes shone with warm, joyful blue aquamarines. Her eyes were wonderfully expressive. In them, there was sometimes anxiety, sometimes a sly smile, sometimes quiet sadness. They laughed and cried, rejoiced and grieved, joked and questioned. And for all this, their owner didn't need to open her mouth, utter words, shed tears, frown, or smile like other people. He tore himself away from her face with difficulty and stared at the tip of a thin finger with a short, oval nail. "Can you hear me? Hello?" She leaned over him, looking intently into his eyes. This made him gasp. His throat felt tight. "Look at me. That's right. Good. And now again. Look to the right. Now to the left. Good. Well. Seems okay." She mumbled something in her elvish, human. "Pupils are calm, temperature is normal, no nausea, eye movement is painless. Let's assume you got off with a slight scare." "Yes." He nodded happily. Not understanding a word, he would have agreed to anything just for her to stay near. Suddenly, it didn't matter to him where he was, what was happening to him, who he was, or why he couldn't remember. If all this was the price for meeting these incredible eyes, for the elusive light smile, for hands that smelled of green leaves and rain, well, at such a price he was gladly willing. He was gladly. And then the fairy surprised him. With strong, skillful, completely non-ethereal hands, she unexpectedly lifted him by the shoulders and tucked a pillow under him. "Well, now you need to eat," she said. After these simple, earthly words, he finally came to his senses. Until that second, he had been as if in a trance, watching the changing phenomena spellbound. The hypnosis ended, and immediately his head, ribs, leg, and for some reason, the bandaged fingers on his right hand began to hurt, and his stomach growled so loudly that she listened in surprise and nodded understandingly. A few minutes later, he was sipping with pleasure, burning himself, amber chicken broth speckled with fragrant herbs from a large mug, probably some kind of magical potion. Then there was another light prick in the shoulder, after which the pain, which had been trying to snatch the cup from him, quickly began to subside. "Well, that's good. Now you need to rest, and then we'll talk," she said, her eyes shining cheerfully. It seemed his appetite pleased her. She helped him lie back on the bed and, dimming the fragile winter day, drew the curtain. Although it seemed to him that she did it with some kind of magical movement. "Tell me." He raised himself slightly, fighting the quickly encroaching drowsiness. "The gnomes? Were the gnomes really gnomes?" She turned around and laughed, as if scattering silver bells. "Yes, the gnomes were real." "Good," he whispered to himself. So everything else was also real. So she really existed too. With this comforting thought, he fell asleep. His third awakening was simpler, much more pleasant. He lifted his eyelids without even remembering the fear of pain, and immediately began searching with his eyes for his fairy, as he mentally already called this striking creature. The anxious charm remained, because he still didn't understand anything, but for some reason, he didn't want to start understanding. He seemed to be suspended between his past reality and a new, unknown one, and he didn't want to return. Perhaps she felt that he had woken up, and she appeared. Yes, yes, she didn't walk in, she appeared, as if woven from air. "Good morning, day, evening," she said, looking intently into his eyes. "Excellent sleep. You could even say outstanding." She pulled up a chair and sat down. "Well, let's talk." She tilted her head to the side. "Do you remember anything?" "Of course, everything." He nodded. "You, the broth, the gnomes, all three of them, red, blue, and yellow, and you." "And that's all?" she asked again. "And that's all." He nodded cautiously. How could he explain to her that he didn't want to remember anything else when he had her face, the scent of freshness from her thin hands, and the funny song about the fir tree? All right, let's start with the simplest thing. She was relentless. What's your name? My name? He was surprised. It turned out he had managed to forget that every person should have a name. My name is, something was on the tip of my tongue, and it's gone. I don't remember. He shrugged apologetically. I don't know. Well, isn't that a pickle? And I don't know either, she sighed. You see, you had nothing on you. No documents, no phone, no card, simply nothing that could help figure out who you are, where you came from. Maybe you remember a name, an address, a phone number? Anything at all? No. By all accounts, you have amnesia. Temporary, let's hope. Don't be scared. She looked at him doubtfully, seeing no hint of fear on his face. It happens, and quite often, with head injuries, concussions. You need to rest well and try to remember yourself. How did I end up here? At your place? He asked, although he really wanted to say, with you. Listen, she smiled. It's a bit awkward that we're using formal address, like in an interview. Let's switch to informal, okay? Hey, what's wrong? Are you feeling bad? Is your head spinning? She leaned closer anxiously, watching his tense face. Yes, something's wrong. Or rather, it's about to be. How awful. How could he admit to the magical fairy that he was being tormented by the most earthly, prosaic need? What was he supposed to do now? He looked at her with a shy plea. Ah, I see. She nodded calmly. Well, get up, let's go. You're not as unable to walk as you might think. By the way, all the more reason for us to switch to informal address quickly. Such matters are easier to handle between good comrades, aren't they? He didn't even notice how, to the sound of her silver voice, he found himself awkwardly standing on his feet, favoring his bandaged limb. Just a bad sprain, she explained, following his gaze. She slipped under his arm with a quick, flexible movement. So they hobbled to a place which, to his surprise, existed not only in the homes of mere mortals, but also in the dwellings of fairies. There he looked at his reflection and recoiled in fright. A gaunt type with cloudy eyes, a scrape on his forehead, and a considerable 3-day stubble stared back at him from a cracked mirror. Aha, looking good. His hostess nodded cheerfully. But I must admit, it somehow suits you. We even gave you a nickname, Noble Knight Bandit. The boys think you fought bravely, but couldn't stand against 100,000 enemies. Well, never mind. You'll get a bit stronger now. I'll give you a razor, a comb, and you'll be shaven, decent, and boring again. He really wanted to ask who we were, what boys she was talking about, and why being shaven was boring. But he didn't dare. Well, she said, when he lay down on the bed again. So, you don't remember anything? Well, then I'll tell you what I know. Maybe some memories will surface. Something will suddenly come to mind. Okay. By the way, my name is Victoria. Vicky. This is my apartment. So you can stay here as long as you need, completely at ease. So, the fairy tale fairy turned into a quite real young woman named Victoria. But his inner tremor at the sound of her voice, the smell of her hands, the look in her eyes, hadn't disappeared. It had only strengthened with the thought that all this belonged to someone who wouldn't vanish. Half an hour later, he was thoughtfully fiddling with the edge of the blanket, going over what he had heard. She had found him on the street, near her house, late in the evening, in a snowdrift, in just a shirt and jeans, beaten, unconscious. Asking a passerby for help, she dragged him to the emergency room. They were asked to leave. He had no documents. And yet, at her requests, demands, pleas, and threats, he was brought to consciousness. His head and leg were bandaged, and his fingers were wrapped. To a clinic? I don't have one. Sorry. That's why I brought you home, put you to bed. Well, and then you know, she finished simply. But don't worry. I'm not a doctor, but I can provide first aid and proper care. After all, I have 5 years of medical school behind me. She sighed lightly, thought about something, but then, as if catching herself, smiled easily and brightly. You'll rest for a couple of days. Maybe you'll remember something. And anyway, you need to recover quickly, because New Year's is in a week. Something stirred, moved in his head, but then quieted down again. I see. So, you live here alone? He asked cautiously, still unaccustomed to using the informal address, and posed a very important question for him. What if everything fell apart now? What if his fairy had a legitimate fairy? Well, why alone? She chuckled, and his heart ached with longing. Completely alone. Although, to be honest, sometimes I really dream of being alone, even for a little while. You've already seen my company. That's how we live. 4 of us. With the gnomes. You live with gnomes? He asked, stunned. With 3, he clarified. For some reason, a funny ambiguity hung in the air, and suddenly Vicky began to shake with quiet laughter. He looked at her in surprise, smiled uncertainly, giggled, clutching his ribs, wincing and groaning, and then burst out laughing himself. Aha! That's the kind of Snow White I am, though slightly short-changed by fate. Vicky laughed, finally turning into a charming, earthly woman. I only have 3 gnomes, not enough for a full set. Calming down, wiping away tears, Vicky hit him with an incredible fact. It turned out that the gnomes were not fairy tale creatures at all, but children. Twins, George and Alex, 5 years old, and Victor, who was the same age. And when he first saw them, they were trying on costumes for the New Year's party at kindergarten. That's how his delusion amusingly dissipated. Wait, I don't understand. If George and Alex are twins, and Victor is their age, they should be triplets, shouldn't they? He tried to understand why the news of 3 children didn't shock him at all. Probably because everything about her had to be unusual, not like other women. Let her be earthly, and have a wonderful but ordinary name, and even study at university. But she was still a miracle, extraordinary and incredible. She had 3 little ones. Well, that too was a miracle. Well, why necessarily triplets? Vicky smiled. Not necessarily. There's a riddle for you. Lie there and ponder. Very useful in your condition. Okay, we've done the bandaging. You've slurped up the soup. I gave you the shot. Now sleep. He hastily caught the thin hand, smelling of the same melody of greenery and freshness, and pressed it to his lips. He gasped in surprise. The palm, which he thought he held firmly with his bandaged fingers, literally dissolved, disappeared, leaving a slight coolness and sweet bitterness on his lips. He moaned with pleasure, and as usual fell into silence and darkness. One bright, calm day, then another. His leg ached, his ribs complained, one of his fingers was swollen. And yet he had never felt so good. He couldn't explain it. He lived in a small apartment, tried to help the constantly busy Vicky, and remembered children's games. The boys were wonderful, healthy, slyly intelligent, and there wasn't a drop of what is usually used to label children from poor and single-parent families. They were more than adequately provided with everything they needed: love, affection, care, and tenderness. And all this was generously seasoned with songs, fairy tales, pancakes, and games. The twins, Alex and George, were charming blonde rascals, always plotting something. They constantly played tricks on everyone, taking advantage of the fact that no one but their mother could tell them apart. Victor, dark-haired, brown-eyed, slightly taller than his brothers, was completely different in appearance. And his character was also completely different, serious and calm. Perhaps this was due to the creepy scar that split his upper lip, causing him to lisp when he spoke. Vicky called him Bunny. However, as soon as the boy entered the orbit of his brothers, there was no trace left of his thoughtfulness. And suddenly, he began to remember. The second day of their cohabitation was ending. The little ones started their usual roughhousing, but after a while, one of the twins, seized by a creative impulse, began to sing, "Tony, Tony, let's go dig potatoes. Tony, Tony, let's go dig potatoes." His comrades echoed in unison. Vicky laughed, and he flinched and lunged forward, but got tangled in the blanket and nearly fell off the bed. Potatoes. Tony. I remember. My name is Potatoes. That is Tony. Anthony. I'm Anthony. Well, hello, Anthony. Nice to meet you. She smiled, and, her bright blue eyes shining, shook his hand. Well, Anthony, she said his name with pleasure. The first step is taken. Now everything should go faster. And maybe you should contact the police. Surely they're looking for you, worrying. She involuntarily looked at his worn jeans and shirt. Yes, I understand. I'm a bother to you, to you. I'm sitting here, eating you out of house and home. You're spending money on food, medicine, time, energy on me. And yes, I should leave. I understand everything. But I don't want to leave. The words burst out unexpectedly and surprised him no less than Victoria. Well, if you think so, of course, you can stay with us for a few more days, get stronger. Frankly, I'll be happy if you stay for a couple or 3 days. Here. Noses were running, as always, all 3 of them in unison. They won't let us into kindergarten, and I can't stay with them right now. I have a lot of work, and New Year's is just around the corner. It's just awful. And as if on purpose, Grandma Zoe, our neighbor, is sick. Usually she helps me. So if you stay with the boys, you'll be a great help to me. My God. Finally, he could be useful to her in some way. He suddenly wanted to fall to his knees, kiss Vicky's hands, and thank her for the honor of helping her. Frankly, he didn't understand how she managed everything. Early in the morning, she would rush off somewhere. By lunchtime, she would bring a pile of colorful paper, frames, folders, and, humming, she would cut and glue with enthusiasm. Then she would fuss in the kitchen, splash in the bathroom, gather her mysterious crafts, and rush off again. In the evening, the apartment would fill with boys, shrieking, banging, dirty sneakers, drawings, slurping, songs, arguments, and sometimes desperate roaring. Finally, everything would quiet down, and Vicky would disappear like the last ray of sun, sometimes for the whole night, only to appear at home as imperceptibly as the first morning light filters in. But washed clothes would be neatly folded, pots would be fragrant with soups and stews, everything would be in its place, and the boys would magically become clean and combed. How did she manage it? A mystery. Perhaps it was one of her magical secrets. Victoria was reluctant to tell him about her life, or rather, she didn't say anything at all, just smiled. So there was no doubt about the futility of these stories. Why talk about the past? Wasn't it obvious that here and now she was absolutely serenely happy? That she was completely content with life, enjoying every day of it, and only dreaming that, God forbid, nothing would change? Only much of what surrounded her somehow didn't fit the concept of absolute happiness. However, could he judge what this amazing woman needed? Maybe she was truly happy? Frozen fingers, no down jacket, a shoe sole falling off. All this was certainly no reason to refuse a cheerful walk with the boys. And what did pale wallpaper, a rattling refrigerator, and one working burner matter? So what? Did all this hinder the unrestrained fun that reigned in the house? No, quite the opposite. It was so fun to draw together on the faded wallpaper, and no one else had such pictures on their walls. And perhaps it didn't matter at all that slight shadows had forever settled under those amazing eyes, and tiny collarbones stretched the thin skin. Well, maybe that's how they were supposed to be, translucent, weightless. Where have you seen a fairy with rosy cheeks and excess weight? Realizing that he wouldn't get anything out of Vicky anyway, Anthony looked more closely at everything that surrounded her and at the people living nearby. The house was small, 2-story, with one entrance, very old, with a wide, creaky staircase. There were 4 apartments, and everyone knew everything about each other, and then some. The house was sick, celebrated, grieved, was indignant, and rejoiced. In short, it lived. And Victoria was its small, brave heart. Anthony became convinced of this very soon. Holding onto the railing, the man was already hopping quite skillfully on his leg and a half, accompanying the gang of boys outside. "There they are!" shouted the neighbour from the ground floor, Irene, whom they called Auntie. She was known for her quarrelsome nature, was routinely in confrontation with her neighbours, and, of course, was extremely displeased with the bunch of constantly noisy boys leaving footprints on the clean floor and scattering things. "Sorry, I forgot to give instructions before going out." Anthony laughed, hobbling up to the woman standing in the pose of a punishing fury. "You can't teach them anything," she grumbled. "They're blockheads, all of them, 1, 2, and 3. "Oh, why say that? Why?" Anthony shook his head. "They're wonderful boys, and so close. It's strange that only Victor doesn't resemble either Vicky or his brothers at all. Not a drop. And for some reason, he says he was born on June 10th, and the boys on the 25th. Well, he's not Vicky's, and he's no brother to the twins," the neighbour replied. "That is, he's not related to them. That soft-hearted fool took him from the maternity hospital along with her own. 2, of course, wouldn't be enough, but 3 is just right. He's an abandoned baby." She looked angrily at Anthony's puzzled face. "Don't you understand? Well, he was abandoned at the maternity hospital. His own mother abandoned him. He was born like that, a freak with a hair lip. And everyone wants perfect babies, like angels, as if they're going to live in paradise later." The woman smiled bitterly and maliciously. "Well, and there you have it. She dragged 3 home, like a cat, honestly. Sometimes she doesn't have enough to feed her own, and she's put a stranger around her neck too." The accumulated bitterness that permeated Irene struggled with something light, and suddenly, kindness won. The woman smiled, and her usual mask of grimness seemed to fall from her face. Although, of course, Vicky saved Victor. Where would he go like that? No one else would have taken him. Straight to an orphanage, and then to a children's home. And there, can you imagine what would happen to him? Like that, there? They would have tormented the boy to death. That's all. And suddenly, as if remembering herself, she grimaced. Her life will start from this. Well, not life, but hard labor. Now she's working herself to the bone at 3 jobs. Soon there'll be nothing left of her. And all of us women are fools. That's how we live. For whom? Who knows? Giving ourselves away completely. And then we're left with nothing. You work like a camel without rest. Then you stand in the kitchen. Then you sleep almost standing up. She looked at Anthony, who had already started descending. No time to think about yourself. To go to the hairdresser. For a massage. Just one day in your life to live only for yourself. Like a real woman. I'm a woman too, by the way. And tell Vicky, if she's really going to decorate the tree in the yard, she should clean up the trash herself afterward. Irene's shouts were heard, even after the entrance door closed behind him. Ah, so that's who Grandma Zoe is these days. Anthony heard another woman's voice behind him, but completely different. Quiet, calm, slightly shaky. Just in case, he counted the boys bustling in the snowdrift and turned around. Behind him stood a short, slightly stooped old woman in a funny fur hat. "You're Anthony. Vicky told me about you." She smiled, with an incredibly warm, kind smile, the kind only grandmothers can give. "She found you, did she? And now she's nursing you back to health?" "Not surprising. That's how she is. Always has been. Always rushing to help everyone. It doesn't matter who's in front of her. A child, a sparrow, a man, a kitten, an old woman. Just don't tell Vicky you saw me outside," she asked, smiling. "She'll scold me for going out. She came running to me this morning on her way to work, checked my blood pressure, brought me pills, ordered me to lie down and drink cranberry juice. But here I dragged myself out. I really need to go to the post office, send gifts to my grandchildren. My grandchildren are far away. My son Samuel works there. I just want to see my Sammy and the girls. I can't bear it." She sighed and dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. "No, I don't blame Sam," she defended her son. "Where would he find the time? It's flying halfway across the country. They're busy people, both him and his wife. They don't forget me, don't think that. They call me often. They worry too. They keep promising, 'We'll come, we'll definitely come.' But when can they? No, I understand everything. I'm just very afraid, because I might die any day now and not see them." She again waved her handkerchief, raised her bright, clear eyes to Anthony, and smiled shyly. "Oh, Tony, I'm sorry. I've been chattering away at you." She laughed a small, quiet laugh. "You just reminded me of my Sam. Well, it was nice meeting you. Just remember." Saying goodbye, she walked away, carefully clutching the package with gifts. And he, who hadn't said a word to her, watched her go for a long time, feeling an unfamiliar ache for someone else's separation. The boys, having had their fill of playing, tumbled noisily into the entrance hall, covered in snowballs. Anthony, unable to keep up, hobbled behind. A leather glove lay on the first-floor landing. "He drops them all the time," one of the boys called from upstairs. "He lives in apartment 2. Anthony rang the bell, and a few seconds later, a thin woman with a tired face and dull eyes opened the door. "Ah, Walter?" Anthony stammered, fiddling with the glove. The woman waved her hand towards the room. A man was sitting on an old sofa, broad-shouldered, with regular features, black, wavy hair. Even if he were a man who preferred to admire female beauty, Anthony had to admit, the man sitting before him was very handsome. He didn't belong here, among the faded wallpaper and old furniture. He should be shining with intelligent eyes on a movie screen, be a coach. But the man couldn't do any of that. Not stand, not run, not jump. Nothing. Because his legs, helpless, unnaturally thin, and dead still, chained him to the floor more securely than multi-ton shackles. He raised his head and smiled. "Again?" he said. "No, really. I'll ask Mom to sew on an elastic band." I walk, but metaphorically. That is, I ride, used to ride. "What about a wheelchair?" Anthony asked cautiously. "It's called a mobility chair," the man said, without self-pity and with familiar pain. "Even though I'm without a leg, I still have privileges. I can sit in my chair even in the presence of the head of the country." However bitter he felt, he couldn't help but smile and laugh. "Vicky came up with that for me, you know. It helps. And generally, if it weren't for her, I might have been, well, never mind. And I do have a chair. Yes, it's over there." Walter waved his hand. "My old one. They've repaired it 10 times, all for nothing. It keeps breaking. And buying a new one is very expensive, and you have to wait for a free one. So I'm sitting here, waiting for a miracle from Santa Claus." There was such hopelessness in the words of the handsome young man, sitting helplessly trapped within walls, that Anthony lowered his eyes. And when he raised them again, he blinked in surprise. A painting hung on the wall. At first, Anthony took it for a painted city landscape, a narrow street between old houses, a wet cobblestone street reflecting the light of lanterns, and a lonely figure. And suddenly Anthony straightened up and looked closer. The painting seemed to come alive, to stir. He even thought the little figure took a small step forward. Was he hallucinating again? He looked back at Walter in a panic. Walter nodded and smiled. Anthony walked closer and gasped. The painting was 3-dimensional. The houses seemed to protrude from the frame, like real ones, and it seemed that light would soon appear in the windows. A tram would turn the corner. Look, the tracks were gleaming, and the figure would jump and hurry about its business. In scientific terms, it's paper toll, a technique for creating 3-dimensional pictures, Walter explained. And in simple terms, it's called Vicky's Little Miracle. It's her painting. She gave it to me a long time ago. I just look at this street, and sometimes I feel like I'm walking on it myself, breathing the air after the rain, afraid of getting hit by a tram. My God, what happiness it is to be afraid of getting hit by a tram. Ah, never mind. He decided to change the subject. How come? You've been staying at her place for several days and haven't seen any of her paintings? Although, yes, she doesn't keep them at home. She's afraid of falling into self-admiration. How can she have nothing left? She just makes them and sells them right away. She needs money for the boys, for all her charity. And she also works shifts at the hospital, washes dishes in a restaurant. And I just sit. Walter pulled the pathetic remains of his legs towards him and smiled. "Can you imagine?" she told me once. "Wally, I calculated that to buy you a new chair, I only need to make 86 paintings. I've already made 10, just a trifle left." Isn't she a fool? A few hours ago, Anthony had already heard Vicky called a fool. But then the shrill woman's voice had boiled with misunderstanding and bitterness, so the word had been poisonous. Now the disabled young man said it softly, gently, carefully, and it sounded like a tender, touching confession. "Are you leaving soon?" Brown-eyed Victor looked at Anthony seriously. "Tired of me, huh?" The man nodded playfully. "Getting in your way here. Yesterday I accidentally ate George's apple." "No, it's just, you see, I really love apples. I've always eaten several since I was a kid, even with the core." Anthony froze. Something inside him surged powerfully, jumped like a fish thrown ashore, trying to return to where everything was familiar. But losing strength, it quieted down again. That wasn't George's apple, it was mine. He ate his right away. But what does that matter? He heard Victor's voice and looked at the boy bunny in confusion. I'll give you all of mine. The twins will too. Just don't leave us. At least until New Year's. Why? Anthony was amazed. I'm no use to you. Mom just doesn't cry anymore, Vicky explained patiently and somewhat frighteningly. Ever since you came to us, she hasn't cried once. She thinks I don't see, and nobody sees. But I see. And nobody should cry on New Year's. Everyone should be happy, like us, like me. Victor said the last words confidently. The little boy, born to be disadvantaged, proudly boasted about something he couldn't possibly have by definition: happiness. Vicky, Anthony looked at her. This smell, so fresh. What is this smell? She asked, surprised. Ah, it's verbena. Always loved it. And it scares the boys away, like mosquitoes. If you use a little too much, they start sneezing and leave me alone. Anthony, what's wrong? He swayed, closed his eyes, and grabbed his head. It buzzed. Verbena. Of course. The freshness of wet leaves and citrus. That was the smell of verbena. Mum, this is my gift, Sonny. These are my favorites. Phrases, whole and fragmented, voices, engine noise, crowd shouts, computer whispers, racing car roar, mobile phone melody, clinking silver, airport announcements. All this crashed down on Anthony like an avalanche. It rushed about in his head in a frenzy, as if trying to find and take its place as quickly as possible. I remember, he exhaled. I remember. I'm Anthony Klimov. I'm 34 years old. I live downtown. I'm so happy for you. Her eyes shone. So happy. It's so wonderful to remember yourself. It's like you gave yourself a gift for the new year. She laughed. So, you have somewhere and someone to go back to? He nodded. Wonderful. A light shadow fell on her face and disappeared faster than he could blink. Simply wonderful. Well, goodbye. We'll miss you. And please, don't forget anything else. She touched his cheek more with a sigh, a scent, a warmth than with her lips, and disappeared as dreams should. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth, that was him, Anthony Klimov. The boy, the only son of a very wealthy businessman, grew up in complete comfort, provided with everything imaginable. Especially after losing his mother early. Anthony received an excellent education, polished to a blinding shine, and the position of future heir to a large firm. Along with this, he inherited a destiny predetermined, from which it was almost impossible to escape. However, the path was comfortable, luxurious, and enviable. When Anthony turned 30, his father fully handed over the business to him, and with that, he took on the duties of being the life of the party for a group of rich young businessmen convinced that everything is for sale and purchase. The only question is the price. They bought and sold cars, companies, honor, clothes, resorts, women, health, conscience, restaurants. Only Anthony suddenly began to notice that with the years, the price kept getting higher, and what was bought got worse. Life began to offer outright garbage, from which his head ached with longing and his heart grew indifferently cold. And then, at the very end of the year, there was a half-joking bet. When was the last time you worked in a way that wasn't just clicking buttons, yelling into a phone, or bossing secretaries around, But really, with your hands, what can you actually do? Take away your credit cards, your supercars, you'll starve to death in a week. One of them got heated. I still remember your screams on the plane that people with illnesses should fly on separate flights. When was that? And anyway, that's not the point. I can easily live without money. Bet? Anthony held out his hand. Bet! Exclaimed his friend. My driver's parents are just moving out of an old communal apartment. There's your place to live. Just remember, you give up everything. Your watch, your ring, your 100,000 sneakers, all your credit cards, phones, and we'll monitor your accounts. You won't take out my porcelain teeth, though, Anthony grumbled. Wouldn't that be something? His friend chuckled. All right, you convinced me. Until Christmas. On our Christmas trip. Deal? They shook hands in front of a large crowd of witnesses. That's how Anthony Klimov ended up on the outskirts, more like slums, in an old half-empty apartment with leaking pipes. For 2 days, he honestly survived on subcutaneous fat. And then, to get food, he almost fought with stray dogs. He managed to get work unloading a huge truck. Pulling another box, he slipped on a banana peel. He felt quick fingers searching his pockets and pulling off his jacket. And then there was the cold, the darkness and silence, the pain and fear, the smell of verbena, the song about the fir tree, and an adventure the length of a small life. Gnomes and a handsome disabled man, a poor little apartment, a masterpiece made of paper, a lonely old woman, and the most delicious broth. But most importantly, huge shining eyes, a silver voice, and thin, strong hands. All this couldn't be bought with money. Or could it? He arrived at the familiar house and immediately saw Vicky. She was decorating a large fir tree in the middle of the yard. "Anthony!" she exclaimed, her gaze sweeping over the huge black SUV, his perfectly fitting coat, shiny boots, and she smiled. "I see you really had something to remember." "Yes, well," he said, not knowing what to do with his hands, his eyes, his whole self, from the sharp feeling that he was completely alien here. How could this be? It had been so good just recently. They smiled at him. They loved him. Poor, sick, remembering nothing. He was one of them here, and he was happy. And now? What now? Vicky seemed to guess his thoughts and asked, "And what now?" "I wanted to thank you." He pulled a plastic card from his pocket. "What is this?" she asked with her eyes. He had never seen that look in her eyes before, and he thought he had already studied all the shades of her eyes. Now they were grey steel. He mumbled, "Vicky, well, this is money. For you, for the boys, well, for repairs, some clothes. No, don't think. There's a lot, really a lot. You need money. I know you do." "Yes, I do," she nodded, and the silver notes disappeared from her voice. "But not this kind, and not from you." "Well, Vicky, let's not. And you did spend money on me. I ate and drank at your place for almost a week." "Is this for help?" she repeated thoughtfully. "Well, thank you, of course. But I don't take money for help, or for friendship, or for... Anyway, I don't need anything from you." She shook her head and added with a smile, "Imagine, we thought you were a noble bandit, but you're just a rich shopkeeper. We were wrong. I was wrong. Again. And it's a pity." He sat in negotiations, observing the people detachedly, opening up. Just help? He loved her. Could you hurt someone you loved? Or could you? What had he done? Of course, he had hurt her, insulted her. After all, feelings, real feelings, couldn't be bought. They could only be received as a gift. How simple. Why had he forgotten this so quickly? How had he forgotten the disabled man trapped within walls, old Zoe, and the thin hands that smelled like his mother's perfume? Idiot! Moron! Moneybags! Anthony suddenly exclaimed. "You know, Mr. Klimoff," said the astonished interlocutor, "perhaps our terms are not the most suitable for you, but I would still ask you." "Oh, I'm sorry," Anthony laughed. "I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about myself. I'm leaving now. My deputy will sign everything. And I don't have time, forgive me. I have to run." "I have so much to do. After all, tomorrow is New Year's. Time for dreams to come true." On December 31st, he patiently watched as Vicky and her elderly neighbour, with 4 hands, untangled garlands. "Oh, wait, Anthony. What are you doing? You're getting in my way." "There, you made me break a light bulb on the garland, and we have a general gathering at the tree tonight. Grandma Zoe, don't dress the boys too warmly, okay? It's warm outside." "Grandma Zoe won't be able to come to the tree. A car is coming for her in an hour," Anthony suddenly announced. "What?" the women asked in unison and looked at him in surprise. "Yes, yes. Get ready, Grandma Zoe. They'll come for you, take you to the airport, and you'll fly to your son and his family to celebrate New Year's. Your granddaughters are really waiting for you, making you gifts. I called your son. He even dropped his phone from joy. He'll meet you." "But how?" The old woman was flustered. "Tony, I won't make it. I'll die." "You won't die." Anthony nodded decisively. "It's a private jet. There will be a doctor with you constantly with the necessary equipment to help in case of anything." "I'm flying!" The old woman nodded resolutely and even stamped her foot. "No, you can't," Anthony thought. "He hasn't earned that yet. I need to visit your neighbor on the first floor too." Walter. Anthony, limping, stumbled into the apartment, pushing a light but stable mobility chair in front of him, which looked more like a modern, stylish minicar. "This, of course, won't replace your legs, but you know it's an amazing thing. Maneuverable, light. To be honest, I rode it myself for half a day. Everything adjusts. Armrests, footrests, backrest, headrest. Wally, honestly, it's more comfortable than an expensive foreign car. And the main thing is the electric drive. 50 kilometers on a single charge. I don't envy whoever goes for a walk with you. You'll wear anyone out now. And the wheels can handle anything. Asphalt, snow, or even the desert." "Walter." "Oh, you. It's just a chair." "Walk, Walter, as much as you want. Walk." Anthony felt his hand squeezed by surprisingly strong, warm, and honest fingers. "So, are you getting used to the new equipment?" He nodded to Walter's mother, who was bewildered, disbelieving, not knowing whether to cry or laugh, but had already shed her hopelessness somewhere. She looked at her son and frankly admired him. "We're waiting for everyone at Vicky's tree tonight. After all, New Year's is coming soon." They finally gathered in the yard by the shining fir tree under a light snowfall. The boys, who were reluctantly torn away from their gifts, Walter, incredibly handsome, looking confidently ahead, his mother, who looked 20 years younger, Victoria. He had no one to compare her to, his beloved, and there was no need. "Oh, look who's here. Not a speck of dust on him." Irene's creaky voice rang out. "Well, I'll be. So our foundling turned into a prince. Who would have thought?" "Ah, I didn't know. Or I would have nursed you myself." She headed for the entrance, throwing over her shoulder, "Vicky, tomorrow morning, make sure all the confetti papers are picked up. Get the prints out for the cleanup too, don't forget." "Irene, wait!" Anthony exclaimed, catching up to the neighbor. "Wait, Irene. This is for you." He handed the woman an envelope. "What is this?" She stared at Anthony with suspicion. "It's a gift certificate for a full day at a beauty salon. Massage, manicure, hairdresser, masks. What else is there?" "Lots of things, whatever you want. But remember, you said, a whole day just for yourself, like a real woman." "Well, there. Happy New Year." Irene looked at Anthony and Vicky, at the envelope with her beautiful feminine desires, at the burning little tree. And it was unclear what was glittering on her cheeks, probably falling and melting snowflakes. "And what did Santa Claus give you?" Vicky smiled. "Nothing yet." He shook his head sadly. "He doesn't need anything except what one young woman has. She just won't give it to me. Either she doesn't want to, or she can't." "She can," her voice whispered like silver. "Maybe she wants to, very much. She's just shy. It's all yours. And only for you. Take it. Own it. Play and rejoice. Just don't abandon it for long." Vicky and Anthony sat side by side, pressed close together, on the bench near the tree. Complete silence reigned around them, and it seemed to them that there was no one else in the world but the two of them. However, all lovers feel exactly that way. Quiet, light snow fell from the sky, sifting down in delicate flakes. The sparkling tree swayed a fluffy paw. And Anthony simultaneously felt that a tall man with a white beard would peek out from behind it, shake his staff, and sternly ask, "And who is this handing out gifts left and right instead of me?" The snow fell quietly, making the world whiter, cleaner, and kinder. More worthy of the new year. "And I've figured out your secret," Anthony whispered. "Purred," Vicky, pressing against his side. "It's very simple. If you want to be happy yourself, make someone else happy." And somewhere far away, as if agreeing with him, the New Year's chimes struck softly, resonantly, and joyfully.